Greetings programs and welcome to what is probably going to be quite a wittery video, because I had intended to do just a regular tanks or warships replay today, but then I slept absolutely terribly last night. So instead I am going to sit down and do something a bit more quick and dirty, but still kind of naval themed, because this is Hearts of Iron 4 with the Man the Guns expansion, which is largely, but not exclusively, about boaty things, which is obviously the correct naval terminology. Now, it's not the only thing that's in the Man the Guns expansion. There are a lot of alt history paths for different nations. Idea trees? I forget what to call them now. This is the state of my brain today. You know what? We'll just jump into a bit of nonsense I've been playing with as I'm talking, and there's been some issues with that. In fact, there's just been some issues with the patch and the DLC generally. Some of the ideas for some nations work fine with the vanilla games still and the previous DLCs, but because there were some changes to the tech tree, particularly the naval tech tree that were made with Man the Guns, they are functionally useless. If you have Man the Guns, they don't actually do anything. You spend 70 days or however long it is for the individual ideas, and it does nothing at all because it refers to a tech that isn't actually then available. And there's a bunch of stuff like that. There's some of the alt history paths for Britain, for instance, are, I think, still completely broken, although they may have fixed that. They pushed out a patch the other day. 1.61 has gone live and they are working on 1.62, so some of these issues have been addressed. But yeah, this is a DLC and a patch that has come out with, it looks like, not a sufficient amount of Q&A time put into it, because some of the things that slipped through were pretty bad. They were the kind of things that really should have been spotted in QA testing. But I'm not really here to talk about the patch or the sometimes dodgy process of Paradox games and QA testing. I mean, it's not unique to this game necessarily. But yeah, Man the Guns, and specifically the naval side of things, because I've been playing with this. Now, this was a historical focused game. This is, as you can see, the grim dark future of 1969, where there is only war and the world looks a little bit silly. And that's because one of the things that has been consistently happening since 1.60 came out is the German Reich just massively steamrolls the Soviet Union if it's played by AI and you don't give it some form of bonus. It seems to happen basically every time. So there's obviously something funky going on with either the German AI or the Soviet Union AI. But once that happens, it gets really hard. If especially with historical focus and Japan joining the Axis, it gets really hard to then make any kind of landfall. And at that point, I mean, I've been in the Allies for absolutely ages. At the moment, it's basically just America that's keeping things afloat because Britain capitulated not that long ago. In fact, it took the German AI absolutely ages to get round to actually going in naval invading Britain. And that process has been improved, just as an aside. Naval invasions are a bit easier these days. There's a specific thing for it with your naval groups that you can support naval invasions. Although this is one of these things that seems to have slipped through the cracks, is that when you're actually transporting troops just normally across water, though, they are incredibly vulnerable to submarines, which are extremely powerful at the moment, and the AI doesn't know how to cope with that. So I've seen things on Reddit and the official forums where people are reporting Britain and even the US just literally running out of manpower because they keep sending their troops in transports overseas and they just get sunk by submarines. And it's to do with how submarines work with the AI, in that they're kind of everywhere and nowhere all at the same time. And then the moment your transports hit the water, as it were, the subs all kind of teleport, essentially, to that location so that they can make an attack. So it's kind of confluence of how the game is designed plus the AI really not knowing how to cope But the AI really not knowing how to cope is not a new thing in Hearts of Iron 4. It's a very weak game in that regard, and it has been since launch. Personally, I think at this point it could maybe do with the kind of strip down and overhaul of some of the core mechanics as they did with Stellaris. But it's not so much the mechanics as just the AI. I mean, it's better than when the game came out, when it was absolutely diabolically bad, but it's still fairly terrible. You might have noticed on the loading screen it said Expert AI 4.0, which is a mod which improves the AI, and I've played with it a little bit, and I think it does improve things a bit, so that's a recommended one. But this is otherwise, I think, without mods, apart from, obviously, the one that lets you go past the end date, although I think you can do that these days as well if you are still in a war with a major faction. Anyway, I'm completely off track with where I meant to be, but I did say this was going to be a bit wittering and long-winded. So Britain capitulated, and here's Mia's Island, and basically I wanted to test out the Navy stuff, and so I did, and here is my Navy. Now, there's definite good and bad things that are going on with how they have redesigned ships and naval combat. The good stuff is that it's now a lot more flexible in terms of what you, the player, can do in terms of designing your ships. And I will say it works pretty well, but they've basically just lifted the ship designer from Stellaris, so it's nothing radically new. In fact, we'll look at that right now through the production screen. And you can basically, in all the different categories, come up with your own designs of ships. So what happens is when you're researching, and as you can see, I've researched nearly everything at this point. I think there's some, like, I haven't done all the tank variants or anything, because I really wasn't building anything in the way of army forces. It's pretty much just been ships and planes. Where are we? So boats, that would be the right tab. So you research the hull. And you've also got various things that you need to research as well, the different gun modules. I mean, it's possible, I can't even remember if I started this with Ireland, but I think I started with, was it like the early destroyer hull unlocked, but the basic guns weren't unlocked, so I couldn't actually put guns on the design, so I had to wait a while before I could research that. And there's also a thing where when you're doing this, once you've researched a hull of some kind and you want to start putting things on it, well, that takes naval experience to do so, just like improving, say, mechanized equipment, or, well, actually that's a bad example because you can't do that, but tanks. Where's the tanks? You can improve tanks, you can do various things, you can spend your XP, and you change the stats basically. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point we see the changes with the naval designer as a separate DLC for, I mean, if they're really cheeky, they might do separate ones for both air and armoured forces, because you can't, I don't think, do anything with any of the artillery types or motorised vehicle types, although some of the mods let you do that. There are mods that let you spend your XP to get, more reliable infantry weapons, for example. But we're looking at the Navy stuff, and I keep getting sidetracked. So let's have a look at, say, the battleships. Well, here I have a bunch that I never actually use the templates. When you first research them, they show up as a blank template. And what you are tempted to do, what you can just do, is go in, start fiddling around, and you save the thing, and that actually then saves over the template, and at that point you have to spend extra XP to demount things to then redesign that hull into something else, which can be a bit of a pain. So what I've learned to do is, and it's not obvious that you should do this, but this is what you do, is you hit the duplicate button before you've done anything else, and then you can start designing. So let's throw that away. That's a crappy early, World War I vintage battleship hull. We don't really want that. But I'll note, by the way, with the exception of the super heavy battleship, some hulls represent different classes, or they can represent multiple classes. So I could choose to have this 1940 version, this 1940 ship hull, be either a battleship or a battle cruiser, depending on which armour type of module I put in there. The super heavy battleship, however, is just, it's basically you're building a Yamato or a Montana, but pretty much just the Yamato. So, yeah, let's look at well, let's create a duplicate design. So yeah, you've got all these slots. You've got your kind of necessary equipment slots, and you'd think you'd just be able to right click and it would, I'm sure they'll add stuff like that with time, but for the moment it's all a little bit on the clunky side. Again, not unexpected for a Paradox game. So yeah, you've got all your basic slots, so you can choose, let's say we want super duper really thick armor, and this unsurprisingly doesn't actually affect the speed of your ship. Well, it does if you're going between Battle Cruiser and Battleship, but there's no difference between Battleship 3 and Battleship 1, except obviously the thicker, better armor is more expensive. But you would think it would affect the speed, but it doesn't. So you've then got a slot for secondaries, and it all seems to be a bit abstracted, so I don't think this is like, you know, you're literally putting 2 secondary guns on the ship. At least I hope it isn't. You've got your engine slot, you've got a choice of, well, on battleships it's just radar, but on cruisers and destroyers this is where your hydroacoustic equipment goes as well. You've got your fire control systems, and at this point it's, I mean, if you put on radar, it improves your attack values, so they're obviously kind of tying it in, so this must just be like purely optical fire control, I guess. I don't know. You've got a dedicated AA slot, and then you've got a dedicated main battery slot, which on the little diagram it gives you only gives you a single turret. Now this is all, as I say, it's a bit abstracted. The actual, if we flick back to the text screen for a moment, the actual different various upgrades, as you can see, your mouse over and it'll say, you know, okay, it's an 85mm gun, a 17cm gun, and a 14.5cm gun. So it is what it is. You know, you unlock these and that's it. That's what you get. There's no kind of, right, I'm going to choose to make this 14-inch gunned battleship, or you know, you've got guns 1, 2, 3 and 4. So it's all a little bit abstracted, and obviously the bigger the guns, the heavier the cost. And I don't know if you're supposed to assume that the, like, I mean, it could be abstracted enough that it's supposed to be, you know, twin turrets versus quadruple turrets, for example, the difference between these two. Although it does actually specifically give you caliber values for that. So I don't know. It's a little bit, you know, I would have liked a bit more customizability in this, but they've done what they've done all along with Hearts of Iron, which is kind of not make it too complicated. And to be fair, I have played a lot more hours of this game than I have Hearts of Iron 4, Hearts of Iron 3 rather, the previous one in the series, which gave you a lot more detail to work with in the game, but it was also a lot more overwhelming as a new player. So let's say I want to be completely stupid and just stick on as many guns as I possibly can. And this seems to only, as you can see, show me, well, it should be showing up like 2 turrets on the front, and it's a little bit hinky. I mean, I think we're basically a kind of approaching a Fuso class at this point, or we would be if they were all like heavy battery ones. But that has resulted in a ship that is unfeasibly slow. So that's not going to work. We can increase the engine by a bit, but at this point the production cost is going through the roof, and so yeah, you can try and do a completely ridiculous design like this, but wow, all big guns. This is literally just a floating artillery thing that's going to need to get towed around all over the place. So that's not going to work. So yeah, you end up with basically doing a mix of things, and for some things like battleships, I mean, it's probably better to favour AA power over main battery power, to be honest. You only need like 2 of the main battery slots filled. But with the other classes, specifically cruisers and destroyers, and to a lesser extent, you can have like 2 potential classes of, or 2 different potential types of subs as well. Yeah, you can customize a bit. Now, some of the nations actually get special hulls, and I will unlock those just now by completely cheating. And Is that the right one? Bear with me a second. There is a console command that gives you all of the technologies, and I'm going to have to look it up. Right, there we go. I just put in a typo the first time or something. Right, what that should have done is give me access to, there we go, a couple of types of ships that I didn't necessarily have before. Now, I think this must be the presets it's put in there. I guess. I don't know why it's showing those as new ship designs. But what I wanted to show you was some of the things that I didn't have access to already, because some of the specific designs are behind different national idea trees. So we'll get rid of those because those are just generic ones. But I think if you're the Japanese, you get access to this special kind of submarine hull. If you are playing as the Germans, you get access to basically the Graf Spee hull, so you can put heavy guns on what is essentially a cruiser platform. If you are playing as one of the Nordic countries, you get access to, it should be down here somewhere, pre-dreadnought hull. No, it might be that you can only get them. No, this might be it actually. Pre-dreadnought hull. Yeah, basically coastal defense ships and very old, you know, still in service battleships. So there are a kind of few edge cases. Oh, and kitikaze. You can make kitikaze as well if you really want. Oh no, there's the coastal defense ship. It's in cruisers for some reason. Okay, so yeah, but Torpedo Cruiser, which gives you access to basically as many slots as the latest variants, the 1944 hull of the destroyer design. You can have even more than that. So you can have an absolutely insane amount of torpedo attack for a cruiser. And you could make a kitikaze if you really want. Or the other nutty thing you can do with this platform is just fill it all with AA, but then it then makes it very, very slow. Because the biggest AA guns are quite heavy, although that's still not too bad actually. So yeah, if you're playing as Japan, this actually makes quite a good anti-air cruiser platform as well. Although not as much as if you do what I did and try to essentially make, well, it was basically that, but with a dual-purpose main battery and dual-purpose secondary gun as well. So you can get a pretty good AA value. But it's not really an Atlanta, it's just a cruiser with like one gun and an absolute crap ton of AA. If you want an Atlanta, you've got to do something more like this and just have all of the dual-purpose secondary guns and dual-purpose main batteries on it. So it still gives a decent amount of AA, but yeah, you can't quite properly do the Atlanta in this game. And there's a lot of real-world ships that you just can't quite properly do at all. The aviation battleships that the Japanese had, for instance, are just kind of excluded entirely. And if you want to do smaller ships than destroyers to use as convoy escorts, you can't do that. Escort carriers is something that you can't really do. Carriers, the kind of balance of carriers are a bit iffy at the moment. I've been kind of using some escort carriers in that I've used the earliest dedicated carrier hull, because when you start off, you basically start off with battleship or cruiser hull conversions, which you can just build as a scratch-built ship, or you can also convert existing cruiser and battleship / battlecruisers to these designs. But yeah, the cheapest that I've been kind of that I was able to kind of get with any kind of decent amount of space and AA and all the rest of it is basically using the earliest design. And yes, I gave them all. I named them all after places in Ireland because I was just, I don't know, I was having fun. I was playing with my toys. And so, yeah, just a single air wing, and this is meant to be a fast escort carrier, but the downside is that it has a manpower requirement of 5,000, whereas in real life, the Bogue class, for instance, it was something like 650. And as I've been playing this island, manpower's been a bit of an issue for me. So I can't really afford lots of these expensive classes of ships. The cruiser hull conversions, you can get them cheaper, but you don't have quite as many slots. And also, I mean, it's like 20 2,500, 1,500 manpower, so it's a lot cheaper in terms of manpower, but it's not nearly as fast. This is as fast as this will go, and I needed a faster hull, basically, or a faster speed to keep up with my very fast cruisers and destroyers on anti-submarine patrol, because they've basically been protecting my trade convoys from submarines, which has suddenly become super important in this update, because submarines are now really powerful. So I've basically got a couple of these light carriers, and I did, just for funsies, build where are we, for my main sort of home fleet. I built I really went overboard with naming these things, like basically a big fleet carrier with an air wing of 80. Hideously expensive in terms of manpower. There was absolutely no reason to build this, but I did it just because this war just seems like going on without end. Although I've been steadily awaiting Germany dropping nukes on me, because for a very long time, for literally decades in fact, England had the crap nuked out of it, and for some reason the AI hasn't then done the same to me, and I don't know why. But once that starts happening, once my infrastructure gets wrecked, I'm sure they'll maybe have a go at it. Although I've tried to slow them down a bit. You'll notice all these little specks in the water, because this is one of the new things you can do now, is lay mines. And I can maybe show off the submarines a bit, because you can use other kinds of ships to lay mines. I think it's submarines and destroyer hulls, but I basically started early on with some very basic designs that were using where are we? That one's the latest one. Mine laying tubes. Now you get technologies which let you deploy mines just through having torpedo tubes, basically, but to have actual proper mine laying tubes is it's a lot more efficient in terms of how you can put them down. But again, I mean, there's a lot of, as I said, there's a lot of abstractions and kind of limitations that you run up against. And like with the submarines, for instance, you have either the choice of a snorkel or some kind of surface radar, so you can actually have much better surface detection. The snorkel obviously reduces your visibility, and so you know, in real life, the late war U-boats, as this hull is supposed to be a 1944 hull submarine, they had both. So there's no reason why you really couldn't have both, but obviously they've decided that would maybe be a bit overpowered and decided to limit you to one or the other. But in practice, that just means you have two classes that support each other. You have one lot that's super stealthy and are really good at torps, and then you have another lot that maybe have better surface detection. Or else you just have them operate in areas where you have very good aerial coverage, because that matters a lot as well when it comes to all the naval stuff. So yeah, I've been having fun with this. I've been having fun tinkering away and just playing with the ships. Probably the absolute biggest pain has been that production screen. There we go. I only have so much space. I've basically filled up all the building spots. I've got more military factories than I really want, but I had to have this many just to keep the planes pumping out, to try and keep the islands above Ireland clear. Oh, I'm building a Yamato, by the way, just because I can. Again, I got bores. It's been building for nearly 2 years at this point. Absolutely no reason to build it. So anyway. But yeah, naval stuff takes a really long time to build, so it's not really that practical to become a major naval power as a tiny nation like Ireland. I really was just doing this to be silly. Playing as the Americans, though, for instance, when they're not having weird civil wars and splitting into different fractions. Yeah, the communist states of America are the leader of the Allies, by the way, at the moment. Still not entirely sure how that happened, but anyway. Or if you're playing as you know, Russia, if you start ramping up your ships, you can lean heavily into making ships as Russia, although that shouldn't really be your priority if you're playing as Russia, I suppose. Italy, like the Royal Navy, of course, starts out absolutely massive. You practically don't have to build many new ships when you're starting off as a Britain player. You can just start tinkering around and refitting, because that's the thing I didn't actually mention. you'll notice, I mean, I talked about the actual process of designing a thing. Well, you can take an existing design, let's say my Galway class super heavy battleship, and let's say I want to call it the Galway class 2, and I can start changing things. And because it's the same hull design, and you can only upgrade things to the same hull type, so I can't upgrade a cruiser like a 1940 hull cruiser to a 1944 cruiser, but I could stick better guns, better AA, a better engine, and at that point you can send them away to be refitted, which will take up some of your dockyards, and therefore your ships, your existing ships, can then potentially be made useful all the game through. And of course there is the then sort of trade-off between, well, I could upgrade the ships to become more useful, but if I take the ships out of circulation, then I need other ships to replace them. Well, probably less of a problem again if you're the Royal Navy and you just have so many ships. But yeah, if you're operating a smaller navy, it's a real question, and it's a big step up from previously, and I presume still it would be the case in vanilla, where when you have those older ships, once you've built them, they just become increasingly obsolescent as the game goes on, and you can't really do anything about it other than eventually just scrap them and get back the manpower into your general manpower pool, and otherwise you can't do anything with them. Whereas now, if you have man the guns, you can upgrade them, or heck, you can even turn them into a carrier conversion, although that does take quite a long time. So overall, I quite like this as an update, but yeah, it has got some real problems around this patch and around the DLC. They've got a lot more bugs to iron out and a lot more work to do on the AI, which has some real problems. But I just enjoyed the fact that I was able to I was able to license the design and have my very own Nelson class ship, and then I refitted it to make it even better. And I did exactly the same thing with the I've been pretending, because why the heck not, that my Galway class is basically a Super Nelson, and I put it as an all forward turret configuration. Although given that it's basically a Yamato hull, would that then not make it an Izumo instead? I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, I've been having fun with it. I've been wasting some hours with this, but it definitely needs some serious fixing. So I'm not 100% sure I can recommend Man the Guns, the DLC, and I'm not 100% sure I can recommend the game Hearts of Iron, just even compared to some of Paradox's much more polished titles. But I've had some fun with them, and I've done a bit of multiplayer with them, and it's okay. It's all right. If you enjoy playing around with boaty things, then it will maybe scratch some of that itch, getting to build up your own fleet and call them names, and come up with your own class designs to meet specific needs, just like they did in real life. That kind of side of things is quite fun. But this has almost, and this is kind of leading me into my conclusion, this is almost just me filling in some time until another game comes out, one called Rule the Waves 2. Now, Rule the Waves has been out for a while. I've never actually played it, but I've watched it a bit on YouTube. And it's essentially it's kind of like the Man the Guns side of design and build your fleet up and including to designing the individual specific ships and researching the technologies and deciding whether to upgrade your ships or keep them in active service and staying within budgets and whatnot. And yeah, it kind of looked fun. It looked like the kind of game I would absolutely fall into. And then I learned that there's another one actually coming out later this month. Well, so I'm told, or so the internet has been told. So I might well buy that when it comes out and give that a go, and you might well see a video on that, because as much as I've enjoyed playing around with my boats, there's absolutely no way that as Ireland I can turn this game around. This is just basically me either waiting for Germany to finally invade, or else it's just going to be this stalemate forever. But with Rule the Waves, it is just the naval side of things. You don't need to worry about all the other things that go on in Hearts of Iron 4. Because, heck, even in Hearts of Iron 3, you could automate the bits of the game you didn't necessarily want to play. You could potentially have put all the ground forces and all the research and all the economic industrial production just literally in the hands of the AI and just played with the bits you want. Although I think it was really intended that you put all the non-military bits in the hands of the AI and then just play with the armies. But there's not really anything like that option in Hearts of Iron 4. So yeah, Rule the Waves 2 should be interesting. I'm definitely I'm going to give that a go. So we'll see. We'll see what that's like. So, wow, this has been half an hour. I did warn you. I said I was going to witter, and I did. I was absolutely dead on target, so there we go. But yeah, hopefully you have enjoyed the wittering nonetheless. If you have, you can do all the usual things down underneath the video. And of course, as always, stay tuned for more.